This is our land, a land of peace and of plenty, a land of harmony and hope. This is our land, Oceania. These are our people, the workers, the strivers, the builders. These are our people, the builders of our world, struggling, fighting, bleeding, dying. On the streets of our cities and on the far-flung battlefields, fighting against the mutilation of our hopes and dreams. Who are they? They are the dark armies, the dark, murdering armies of Eurasia. In the barren deserts of Africa and India, on the oceans of Australasia, courage, strength, and youth are sacrificed. Sacrificed to barbarians whose only honor is atrocity. But even as we grow,
April the 4th, 1984.
In my position as chief factory planner,
I think.
I stole military plans and at vast financial profit sold them to the Eurasian leadership.
To the past.
I was
Or to the future.
an attempt to supply,
To an age when thought is free.
and so I became open
From the age of Big Brother. From the age of the thought police.
to his direction. I assassinated a number
From a dead man.
of organizing false evidence
Greetings.
to implicate the faith.
We falsely think of our country as a democracy when it has evolved into a mediaocracy, where a media that is supposed to check political abuse is part of a political abuse.
These commercial entities now vie with the government for authority over our lives. They are not a healthy counterweight to government. They are as big as or bigger than government, and they work closely with government.
The most powerful special interest in Washington today is the media, because not only do they give money and lobby and do all the things that industries do in Washington and companies do, but they of course control whether or not a politician's mug gets on the tube. Now that's power. That's the ultimate power in a political realm, is controlling perceptions.
In George Orwell's novel 1984, Winston Smith worked at the Ministry of Truth, but his job was not to ensure that truth was preserved. Quite the contrary. His job was to alter past news stories so that the version of the truth given by the ruling elite, the party, was never contradicted. If the party, which Orwell called Big Brother, lied to the people, a quick check of Winston's altered records, the only remaining records, would prove that the lie was true. Can lies become truth? Could a media system controlled by a few global corporations with the ability to overwhelm all competing voices be able to turn lies into truth? These corporations are not answerable to the people. Only the politicians can regulate them. Could corporations possibly buy politicians with campaign contributions? Contributions so large that the politicians would allow unregulated corporations to go about their business of eliminating less powerful voices until only one voice remained. One truth.
3 in 4 Americans trusted their government. Today it's 1 in 4 Americans trust the government. The level of secrecy and the amount of money in our process is greater than it's ever been. Archibald Cox, a Watergate prosecutor I interviewed for our book, The Buying of the President 2000, said the level of trust in this country is worse than he's ever seen it, including during Watergate. People sense, I think, that the financial elites and the political elites have become one and the same, and that the people themselves have no voice in Washington or in their state capitals, that they are somehow being left behind.
When we think about democracy in the United States, we oftentimes, and I think certainly in our media culture and our political culture, the assumption is that the type of democracy we have in the United States is the only type that could possibly exist. It's the high watermark of the human race is capable of, is U.S.-style democracy. In fact, though, I think we have, both in theory and in many ways in practice, a fairly, what you call a weak democracy. I mean, in fact, in many ways, we have a frighteningly weak democracy.
There is an unfortunate sense as well of powerlessness, that there really isn't very much that can be done about the state of things.
You can't have 280 million people and say that 2 political parties represent the thinking of 280 million people. That's just think about that. If you are, just step back and look at that. And you know, the thing is that anthropologists, they're going to dig us up hundreds of years from now, and they are not going to understand us. No, seriously. And we've made a huge mistake inventing film and videotape because we're leaving behind a record of ourselves.
We have a situation in which a significant percentage of the population doesn't vote, doesn't care about the issues, is tuned out entirely, is what we call depoliticized. In fact, we have a rate of depoliticization in the United States that must make a tyrant, like in Indonesia, envious. They say, how can I get one of these vegged out populations?
The top 1% that controlled 90% of the wealth had 2 major political parties doing their bidding for them. And the other 99% had no political party on the ballot representing them, and no representation in Congress representing them. And yet that 99% ran around waving little flags going, we're free! We're free! We live in a democracy! Woohoo! Oh, we're gonna look like assholes. No, seriously, folks! We gotta leave a note behind and explain our actions.
We have more instant access.
Opposite quote from Dr. Goebbels. It's a kind of an explosive, thing to invoke here, but he said once, and this is an example of how sly he was, that what you want in a media system, and he meant the Nazi media system, is ostensible diversity that conceals an actual uniformity.
The truth of the matter is that increasingly what we see, what we hear, and what we read is being controlled by fewer and fewer large multinational corporations. corporations.
People don't appreciate this. You know, in the last days of the Soviet Union, you had dozens of newspapers, dozens of magazines, all kinds of radio and television stations. The only problem is that all of that media was controlled by the Communist Party of the Soviet Union or the government of the Soviet Union. We are moving in that direction.
There is an illusion of choice that's maintained when you can have 100 channels on your cable system, and how many movies did the studios release a year now? All these different studios, and the music industry with so many labels, and magazine stands that go on and on and on forever. Well, the owners are a handful, 5, 6 different companies.
And that is a very dangerous development for those of us who believe in a vibrant American democracy.
When polls tell us that fewer and fewer people understand the political process, what the media does is trivialize what goes on, sensationalizes it, makes it entertainment, rather than saying, look, the function of the media is to educate you to live in a democracy, which is pretty serious stuff.
You got a media system that's basically a subsidiary of corporate America. That's all it is. You're going to have a media system that will not cover stories of tremendous public moment, while it will overfocus on trivial stories that don't have any resonance at all.
In terms of the political process, you ask yourselves, what are the most important issues facing our country? Why is it? Simple question. With all of the growth in technology, with all of the wonderful globalization and free trade, all of that stuff, all of the increases in education, why does the average American today work longer hours for lower wages than was the case 25 years ago? Simple question. Do you think it's seen on television very often? What about the morality of 1% of the population owning more wealth than the bottom 95%? Seen that?
In a New York Times editorial, Princeton economist Paul Krugman addressed one of these little-mentioned issues. According to the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, between 1979 and 1997, income for families in the middle rose 9%. Income for families in the top 1% rose 140%. Krugman noted, quote, "I know from experience that even mentioning income distribution leads to angry accusations of class warfare." He then asks, why has the response to rising inequality been a drive to reduce taxes on the rich? Good question. According to Joan Didion, news is no longer just reported but managed in a way that sets its terms and shapes its overall content. Has the mainstream media become an anti-democratic force in the United States?
What you want to say is, if you have a self-governing society, a democratic society, what does that society need from its journalism? I mean, what are the attributes you need to have from your journalism, from your media system to produce, so that people can govern their own lives effectively? And I think there are 2 or 3 things that jump out at you if you study the matter at all. And they're really not debated. One, you need a really hard watchdog. You need a journalism that keeps track of people in power and people who want to be in power.
Hitler says in Mein Kampf that the people's power of forgetting is enormous. This is the case with mass society, right? You have to have a healthy media system in order to counteract that natural tendency. You've got to have that, because then people will be sufficiently roused by the notion of having to protect their interests to pay attention. Otherwise, if it's just a spectacle, if it's just a bunch of razzle-dazzle and bullshit, people will naturally, forget about it in a couple of days, and that's the pickle that Americans tend to be in.
A CNN Gallup poll conducted in March 2003 found that 51% of the American people thought Saddam Hussein was personally responsible